4 years ago, when Barack Obama was sworn in as the first African-American president of the United States, much was rightly made of the historic significance of the moment. But despite all the excitement around that inauguration, there was a lingering question of whether we were truly entering a new era in our nation's history. And that's why I found the president's second inauguration so remarkable. Sure, the crowds were smaller than last time, and the press coverage a bit more subdued, but I believe that when historians look back at the 21st century, they will focus on the president's second election and inauguration as a defining moment. And you get the sense that the president knows it. President Obama's road to re-election was built on a broad, multi-ethnic coalition of voters. And demographers tell us that the United States is only going to become more diverse. That diversity was on grand display in the inaugural crowds and on its stage.
Through blood drawn by lash and blood drawn by sword, we learned that no union founded on the principles of liberty and equality could survive half slave and half free.
The president's speech itself seemed in style and substance a departure from his first term.
You and I, as citizens, have the power to set this country's course.
It was muscular, ambitious, and clearly written with an eye towards framing America's historical narrative to serve as a foundation for a particularly progressive vision of the country's future.
The commitments we make to each other through Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, these things do not sap our initiative, they strengthen us. They do not make us a nation of takers. They free us to take the risks that make this country great.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
The first inauguration I covered was President Kennedy's in 1961, which already seemed at the time destined for the history books.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office.
And over the years, covering subsequent inaugurations, I've always marveled at these days when, no matter who you supported in the previous election, you can't help but be moved by the ritual celebration of our freedom and democracy. It is a time when, at least for a day, it seems that the country comes together as one. Yet there are some inaugurations that stand out with the sense that the nation has taken a new direction.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
In 1961, with John F. Kennedy,
government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
In 1981, with Ronald Reagan, and 4 years ago, with Barack Obama. Yet, President Obama's first inaugural address is largely forgotten.
My fellow citizens,
it was focused on the financial crisis and uncertainty gripping the United States and the world.
Our economy is badly weakened, a consequence of greed and irresponsibility on the part of some, but also our collective failure to make hard choices and prepare the nation for a new age.
In retrospect, most speechwriters and historians considered this first address bland and underwhelming, especially considering the historical stage upon which it was delivered. What was almost completely missing was any sense that the election of 2008 represented the dawn of a new America. Now, 4 years later, the president spoke directly to parts of American society who have largely been marginalized: women, African Americans, and gays. He did it in a line that has gotten a lot of attention.
We, the people, declare today that the most evident of truths, that all of us are created equal, is the star that guides us still, just as it guided our forebears through Seneca Falls and Selma and Stonewall, just as it guided all those men and women, sung and unsung, who left footprints along this great mall, to hear a preacher say that we cannot walk alone, to hear a king proclaim that our individual freedom is inextricably bound to the freedom of every soul on earth.
President Obama's full-throated invocation of Dr. Martin Luther King was understandable, considering the inauguration occurred on Martin Luther King Day. For most in the crowd, this was an historical reference. But for me, who saw the civil rights movement up close and knew Dr. King, it was deeply personal. Largely lost in all the inaugural celebrations was the passing of James Hood at the age of 70.
University of Alabama campus at Tuscaloosa is under a tight security guard of state police as Governor George Wallace appeals for calm.
In 1963, 50 years ago, Mr. Hood was one of 2 African-American students enrolling and thus desegregating the University of Alabama. I was there.
Tuesday, over there at Foster Auditorium, 2 Negroes will come to enroll.
The country was riveted, and as a young reporter, I knew that this was one of the most important stories I'd ever covered.
I stand here today as governor of this sovereign state and refuse to wittingly submit to illegal use.
After a bitter speech by Governor George Wallace, James Hood enrolled.
Oh, beautiful, for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain.
It's important that future generations know the difficult and often bloody history that has led us to a more fair and equal society.
Above the fruited plain.
But in looking at the crowds of all ages at this second inauguration, I also got a sense that much of the bitterness of that history will not be carried forth as America looks to prepare itself for the challenges ahead. And that is the ultimate sign of hope that we have entered a new chapter in the American story.
From sea to shining